movement of people, local people especially, coming from all over Spain. Because of her fame, she's well known in Spain, she's really beloved, and she's, well, in Spain, Christians think of her as the image to turn to when you are having a hard time having children, basically. So she's linked to fertility issues. As the Virgin Mary of Montserrat, the Black Madonna. The image in church is the ones that the monks take care of, is from the 12th century. But the legend of the discovery of this image in a cave goes back to the 9th century. There's a legend, or you could call it church tradition. And this legend says that it was the year 880 when a group of shepherd boys, girls from the village of Montserrat, they were up on the slopes of Montserrat with their goats and suddenly saw a light. This light, in some stories, comes down from heaven, and in other stories it's just shining there very, a lot, shining a lot, so these kids feel attracted to that light, and they start climbing the slope, and eventually get to the point where the origin of the light is, and that's in a cave. So inside the cave there's an image of a black Virgin Mary. Now this blackness of the Virgin Mary comes from years and years of families praying to her and lighting candles around her. Candles that would have been lit all day long, day after day. And so the many, many years of burning candles around that image eventually darkened the original pigment, making it dirty, but also the heat of those many candles would have burnt the original pigment. And that's how she eventually, instead of having the lovely original pigment that she was probably made with, ended up being black. Black, and not very pretty because it wasn't polished and clean, it was just dirt and blackness of the heat. This is the type of blackness that these images had, and that people valued so much, because if the image had gotten to that point, it meant that someone had prayed to her with real faith. So there must be something special in that image to have merited that amount of devotion and faith. And so that's why these black images were always more popular, more venerated than the other ones, the newer ones. So it was a black image that was found in the cave. The children ran down to the village to tell the priest. The priest organized a party of villagers. Up they went, up the mountain, walk into the cave, and eventually decide that they're going to take the image down to their church. So they pick it up and start walking away. And as they do, the people carrying the image say, "Hey, she's getting heavier." Joking. No, it's only because you're tired. No, she's getting heavier. And the further they went from the cave, the heavier the image got, and then it got to the point where they couldn't carry her anymore, so they put her on the floor. And when they tried picking it up again to keep going towards the town, it was impossible. It had suddenly become so heavy that no one could pick it up. That is an important moment in the legend, because according to the monks, that's the moment in which the image itself decides that it wants to stay on the mountain. That whether it's true or not, even if it's just symbolic, that's the moment when this Madonna, this image, becomes so popular in the imagery of Catalans and locals that she becomes the first image that everybody wants to pray at, or to, here in Montserrat. So where there were other images, this one becomes the first one, and then provokes many pilgrims coming up to pray to her. So it's difficult to imagine, but I've seen pictures of local Spaniards coming up to the monastery in the 1920s and 30s. It was thousands, my friends, thousands coming up the mountain. At a point, of course, in history of Spain, when the church was one of the few institutions that offered a possibility of organizing community activities and people enjoying walking out, and pilgrimages. It may seem to us like something difficult, but back then it was a very good way, or probably the only way, to have some joy and some activity, physical activity, and being able to talk and sort of stretch your legs and have a little liberty. So So the church offered this, and so many people enjoyed these pilgrimages. I don't want to talk too much about the religious aspect of the mountain, but it is the most important part because that's why there's buildings there, that's why there's restaurants and services for us. Here we have the gondola on the right-hand side, and locals mostly use public transportation to get up to the monastery. So there's a train coming from Plaza España that drops you off right here at this gondola station, and then up you go, right? But if you don't like heights, then you could stay on the train coming from Barcelona, and the next station is a cogwheel train, which is what most people use. It has more capacity, and it's slower, but very beautiful as a ride up. So those are the two public means of transportation to take you to the monastery. As far as the choir is a 13th century institution linked to the monastery because the monks want little children to sing to the Virgin Mary. They call them angels, if you will, symbolically. They want boys that have those white voices. So this idea of having children sing to the Virgin Mary and at the same time giving them the opportunity of a musical career is old. It's a very old career from when, well, think about it. If a young boy has a beautiful voice and he is going to have a career that way, but then he's going to grow and lose that voice, well, that's when we have the famous castrati. And at the beginning there would have been men with boys' voices. Not anymore. Now children are accepted at the age of 9 and they have to leave at the age of 14. So between 4th grade and 8th grade they can study the normal school curriculum for each of their ages, but also the music school. Usually the day is divided in half: a normal school in the morning, music school in the afternoon. They learn piano, all of them. It's mandatory. Piano is mandatory for every child. And then each child chooses a second instrument of their own choice. So they do 2 instruments plus all the musical language, and of course practicing and rehearsing singing. Usually there's an audition to check, or at least decide which of the voices are the best voices to include. The monks have only 50 beds, so they can't have more than 50 boys. Usually they don't reach 50. There's 43, 45, 48, depending on the year. Every year they accept new students, of course. They also study the child to see whether he's a good student, autonomous. All of these things help. And you have to study and live away from your parents. Because although it's optional for parents to leave their kids at the boarding school, they could have that child back home every day and bring him back every day too. But most parents choose to leave their kids with the community of boys all week, Monday to Friday. Friday they all go home. That's also mandatory. These children have to spend the weekend with their parents and families. So if you're wondering where these boys come from, usually they come from Catalonia, maximum Valencia. And it's also true that they have to speak Catalan because they sing in Catalan. The Black Madonna of Montserrat is the patron saint of Catalonia. And when she was crowned patron saint by Pope Leo XIII in 1881, a priest called Verdaguer wrote the poetry, wrote the words, the lyrics for her song, and they're written in Catalan. And there's more than that. These monks represent the local culture, and everybody loves them and supports them because of that. They've always defended the local culture. They've always made the Virgin Mary being the patron saint of Catalonia. They take care of that important figure. So this community of monks is a very local community.
Do they have a lot of private homes in Montserrat?
None. No private homes. It's the monks living in the monastery. It's the boys living in the boarding school. And there's the hostels, nothing else.
So right here where we are now, that's like...
That was a little village the village of Monistrol de Montserrat. That's the village that appears in the legend that talks about the Virgin, because these kids, the shepherds, were from Monistrol, and the priest that came to check was from Monistrol. As you know, legends always change depending on who tells them. Storytelling, gives you that freedom to invent or come up with new ideas or new ways of saying things. That's why I say the light. Sometimes in some stories the light falls from heaven, and in other stories it just appears.
It's the only road up to Montserrat.
No, it isn't. We have two roads. This one here is the one facing, let's say, the Mediterranean. The other one faces the inland areas. So we often take this one to come up and the other one to go down. Usually that's what we do. Try avoiding encountering big buses on these curves because they're not very wide. So sometimes there's trouble. So we take this one to go up and the other one to go down. Later on when we leave, we'll go by the back.
Hello guys, as you have heard, we are on our way to the monastery of Montserrat, and also the black image
Monsterrat is geologically
black image of the Virgin
very
Mary.
different from the mountain.
Narinig niyo yung
for
legend
example,
as told by
Barcelona was built.
our
Because
tour
this
guide
was,
Marta.
This appeared about 25
Later
million
on
years
we'll
ago when
see,
the water that flooded this area were in the
we'll give you
hydrographic
more
basin of the Empress River. The water that flooded this
view
area
and
left to the Mediterranean and pulled all
information
the debris
about
that
the
was at
Lady of
bottom until
Montserrat
eventually it all accumulated
kung nandun na
and
tayo sa
formed
taas.
this mountain. So the type of stone we have, and we'll see that later on as we approach the monastery, is a stone called agglomerate stone. Agglomerates, that is, it has pebbles all held by the silicates and the sands. It's very strong, resistant stone. But then you see all the pink stuff, and that's clay. That was all the mud that's fossilized, dried up. And that's the two colors of Montserrat: the gray for the agglomerate rock, and the pink for the clay that erodes so easily.
There's no farming up here.
Very, very little, tiny flat areas. For the rest, most of the people that lived on Montserrat were always shepherds. We're going to be passing by, as we walk to the Basilica, the farmers market, and although we call them farmers, folks, these are cheese makers. These folks had always had goats, and they made goat cheese. Now they have the comfort of not having to have animals because they simply buy the milk. So now they produce cheese made out of cow's milk, out of goat's milk, out of sheep's milk, and even buffalo milk.
Okay guys, kayo na mga devotees ng Lady of Montserrat, we'll break off muna ngayon, and we'll see you later as we proceed with our journey. Muchas gracias, and see you in my next vlog.
From the 15th century, that's when the relationship started.